It's absolutely wonderful, Jenny. Thank you so much for telling us that story. And of course, we've only heard tonight about a handful of people that have died from terrorism in Israel. And this terrible thing is still going on just now. And often when we're on the street in Glasgow at our stall, people come back and talk to us about all the Palestinians who were killed. But you never hear anything about Israelis that are killed, which are usually killed by terrorism. And one of the most terrible things in this country is that the BBC has an editorial policy where they don't call these terrorists terrorists. They call them fighters, or they call them other things, but they really are terrorists. And yet the BBC, which is supposed to be fair and unbiased and impartial, refuses to call them terrorists, even though they carry out terrorism acts. And that's a very difficult thing to live with. And there's going to be, I don't know if you know, but the BBC is going to be a new charter in the next year or so, and people will be able to write to the BBC to make them aware of some of the things that they would like to see change. And I think that would be something that we would like to try and support, to try and change the BBC editorial policy, that they call these people terrorists for what they are. Now, Jenny mentioned Steve and Arnold. Steve and Arnold are both with us today, and we were in touch with them before tonight to ask them if they wanted to say anything while on this Zoom, and they indicated that they would. And I really would love to hear from both Steve and Arnold about their meeting with Jenny and what they know and what they feel about Jenny since she's made this contact with them. So Steve, would you like to maybe say a couple of words? Would that be okay? Edward, could we unmute Steve Bloomberg? Just trying to get you unmuted. You'll have to unmute yourself as well, Steve, I think.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah. Okay.
Please go ahead, Steve. Yes, can hear you fine.
Yeah. The truth is, like Jenny described so well our meeting, which was her first meeting with a terror victim, and there really was a mutual feeling, because I really became very attached to her and Brian and the family. They were just great people, nice people to meet, and it just really amazes me, like how they are putting over our story and bringing to life the terror victims who, as she's been saying in the past hour, how we really don't hear enough about them, because everybody who's been murdered, it's a whole life story. It's a whole, everybody has their personality, and Jenny has been bringing these stories to life, and it's remarkable. And one other thing I want to mention, she mentioned this book, this Italian book from, which was written about 15 years ago, and I was quite amazed because she actually reminded me, I spoke to this Italian guy about, it must have been 15, 20 years ago. I actually had totally forgotten about it, and she reminded me of that book. Because every so often somebody very surprising pops up. There was this Italian guy pops up, and then there's this Scottish lady called Jenny who pops up, and there's a German lady who also pops up, and suddenly they want to hear our story, and it's amazing. It's amazing that there is this interest. And I'm really happy that you people in Glasgow are listening to our story, because Israel is one people. We are one people. We're all brothers, despite what you might hear in what's happening in Israel at the moment. I feel very connected with everybody. Doesn't matter what his political views are, because we are one people, and we're all family. You're my family.
We're not going to talk politics tonight, Steve, because if we started doing that, we'll never finish, especially with what's happening in Israel at the moment. But we're not all from Glasgow. We are in Glasgow, and it's Glasgow Friends of Israel who's organized this event. But we've got people from all over the world on tonight, including you from Israel. So thank you so much for coming on, and maybe we'll later on when we go to questions, maybe there may be some questions that people would like to ask you. But I'd like to go back to Arnold now. Arnold, maybe you would like just to say a few words. You need to unmute yourself as well. And maybe just tell us a little bit about your experience with Jennie over the last few years.
Sometimes you meet people whose fineness and capacity as a catalyst make them extraordinary. Now, Jennie looks distinguished, as does Brian, but it's much more distinguished once you get to know them, because the simple humanity that radiates out from them is something absolutely, there's no defense against it. This is very meaningful in the context of the way I look at life right now. I'm somewhat bitter and twisted, not without reason. And if you give me half an opportunity, I'll grab the stage and try to tell you how really rotten some of the things are that have been going on over these last 20 years. But that's not my intention. Jennie and her manager and supporter, Brian, have really done some service to the Jewish people, which I think is going to grow in significance over time. I remember once hearing as a kid that youth is wasted on the young, and it kind of rattled around in my head. And then fairly recently, I realized there's a direct parallel to that, and that is Jewishness is wasted on the Jews. There are so often situations where Jews who have grown up with a heritage that makes them connected to one another and heirs to a tradition that is fabulously rich and fabulously inspiring and of inestimable value, and who just don't know how to appreciate it. And then somebody like Jennie comes along, who was cheated of much of the upbringing that pretty much everybody else on this screen got and pretty much took for granted, and has embraced it with both arms and the rest of her. And it's tremendously inspiring. And I'm not at all affected by the fact that she and I are very likely cousins, although we haven't quite figured out precisely how. I think that even if we were strangers, and thank God we're not, I'd be saying similar things.
Michael Tobias is on here, and I didn't say to Michael that I was going to ask him to say something, but Michael is a really big part of Jennie's story. And I was just going to ask you, Michael, if you could just say a little bit about your initial contact with Jennie and what you did to help her. And I don't know if you can help Jennie and Arnold get to know a little bit more about how they might be connected.
If anyone can, Michael can.
Well, can you hear me? Am I off mute?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I think you've done DNA tests. That's the obvious one, since not all the documents for the towns you came from are available. I like to think I didn't give Jennie that much help. I started her off, and then I tried to catch up with her as she went on this amazing journey. She has such an incredible enthusiasm and strength, and she's a bit like me in some ways. When you start doing this research, it's a huge detective story and all these clues, and you just don't want to give up. And so at times I don't sleep, and I'm pretty sure at times she doesn't sleep either, because she's on a mission. And I hope she goes from strength to strength.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Now, we'd like to try and open up for some questions for maybe half an hour if everybody wants to stay on and ask Jennie questions, or even Steve or Arnold. But obviously Jennie has written this wonderful book, and the information about the book will be available on the chat. And I think it's something that everybody should look at and see the wonderful story that she's written. So I'm going to try and see who's putting up their hand. Has anybody got a question they would like to ask? And if you unmute yourself, then we'll have a look and see if we can get you to ask a question. While people are thinking about that, what I'd like to do is ask Jennie if she's got any plans to go back to Israel and do any more similar work that she's done already? Or is the fact that you've written your book, Jennie, that's a sort of end to the phase that you've been talking about?
Good question, Sammy. I'd love to go back and do more stories and you know, meet more people and work with more survivors of terrorism. Absolutely, you know, I would do it all day long if I could. I think it's so important. I mean, I couldn't cover every story that you know, of the people that I interviewed in this, but every story is so important. And it's just a heartbreaking fact that, you know, monthly, there are more stories added to that. So yes, absolutely, I'd like to go back.
If people would rather put a question into the chat, you can do that as well if you don't want to actually ask a question on camera, and we'll have a look at that. I'm just having a wee look through all the pictures I've got, but not everybody's got their camera on, so I can't quite see. But if anybody's got a question to ask, please, if you put up your hand, we'll let you do that.
Just reading some of the questions here. Somebody's asked.
Yep.
Somebody asked why Kay has two names, and she doesn't have two names. She has one name. So that's been answered in the chat.
Okay.
What happened to her didn't define her. So
Tell us, Jennie, where are you living just now? Then tell people where you are, because obviously you've been here.
northeast of Scotland, in Inverality.
Tell people where that is. People don't know where that is.
Well, you go to Aberdeen and then keep going.
Into the sea.
So Aberdeen is on the northeast coast of Scotland. If you look at the map of Scotland, it looks like a man with a big bump on the back of his head, which is on the right-hand side. We live on the bump, the very tip of the bump. But no, I'm not really Scottish, but I think I should pretend that I am, because everybody thinks that it's better, I think, than saying that I'm English.
Oh, don't say you're English, that'd be terrible. And obviously, if anybody's up in that part of the world, I'm sure Jennie will be very pleased to say hello and tell you a little bit more about her work.
Absolutely.
Sammy, can I just ask Jennie, what I'm going to say might be incredibly obvious, Jennie, but I like to be able to just quote things accurately. The thing I've got out of there's a lot of things in your message tonight, and thanks very much for it. But what I was not aware of is what you said near the beginning and emphasized all the way through, is that you said that you could almost find anyone that's a victim of terrorism in one way or another. Now, can you just kind of reinforce in my own mind when I'm trying to deal with Palestinians that I can say to them plainly that terrorism is, I don't know what word to use, a daily, weekly, monthly experience of people, the average person living in Israel. Can I say something like that from what you've told us tonight?
I'm not quite sure what you mean. Sorry. There's so many victims of terrorism. Is that what I've alluded to?
Yeah. Because as you know, we're not told that. What we're told is all the things that are going wrong with the Palestinians. I'm conscious of that. So what I want to be able to do is, in good conscience, to be able to put it back to them from what you've said tonight, that really the average person living, Israeli living in Israel, has got a regular, I don't quite know how to put it, experience of terror. You see, what I can do from learning from being online, the people down near Gaza, they're having to live with all these fire things coming across, that type of thing, which the average person here in Scotland doesn't know. But to be able to just counter this business, because they're always talking about the Palestinian, the settlements and all sorts of stuff, to be able to say that terrorism as such is a very regular experience of people living in Israel.
Yeah,
because we occasionally hear of atrocities. You occasionally hear of atrocities here, there, and everywhere, and but to be able to say that it's fairly regular, is that fair enough?
I think you'd have to ask the Israelis in the room, but from what I understand, everybody knows somebody that has a connection with somebody that has been involved in a terrorist attack. Could I bring in Arnold, maybe? Arnold, would you say that's the truth?
You need to unmute yourself, Arnold.
Yeah, it's certainly true that everybody knows terror victims, but I think that it's not the quantity so much that's the issue, because all of us know that the Israeli capacity to defend its home turf and its families derives directly from the fact that it's a citizen-based army, and an army where every effort is made to ensure, even at colossal expense to the economy, that society is safe. That's why we have bomb shelters and none of the Palestinians do. That's why we have constant patrols, even in, you know, little frontier towns like the one in which I live, which is called Jerusalem. My daughter was murdered in the center of the capital, in its busiest commercial heart, by a human bomb, as we heard earlier. The real takeaway from that is not where did it take place or how many people were murdered. I mean, in a certain way, of course, I want you to focus on the fact that there were 15 people murdered immediately and the 16th is still unconscious after all of this time. I mean, just imagine what that means in terms of the fabric of human life. 16th person still unconscious. Her daughter, who was a toddler, who was with her, is now a mother herself. Those aren't the issues. The issue here is, what is it like to be living in a society where when you get on the bus or you go to the hospital or you walk into the shopping center or you go into a movie theater, you see people who you know belong to that same cohort of people who are sending bombs and people with knives in their hands, or little children who carry who knows what in their bags, or people behind the steering wheel, and so on and so on. I'm telling everybody what you all already know. The point of the sort of belaboring the point is that we're prepared to go to very great lengths to save our own society. And therefore, thankfully, the injury toll and the death toll is far, far less than the enemy at our gates, and even inside our gates, would want. On the other hand, we keep hearing from all kinds of people, including especially the BBC, about which, if you gave me 5 hours, I'd say, no, I need a serious piece of time, absolutely embrace the idea of hammering home that the real victims here are the Palestinian Arabs. And I can't give a better example of that than a woman who used to host a daily, not a daily, I don't know if it was daily, radio program on BBC4, who phoned me. She was the first journalist who phoned me on the day after my Malki was murdered. She phoned me she phoned me herself, it wasn't her producer, and she said, I'm going to have a program on tomorrow morning. She was calling me Sunday, Malki was buried on Friday. Would you be willing to join us on the program on Monday? And I said, I hadn't even thought of the idea that people might be interested in what it's like to be in the first week of living after the murder of a 15-year-old child who did nothing worse than walk into a pizza store with her friend. And I said, yes. And she said, and I'll never forget these words, and forgive me for sounding like I'm parroting her. She said, oh, good, because we have the father of the young man who, who brought the bomb. And I froze. I became absolutely ice cold. I'd never had that experience in my life. Somebody was saying, oh, good, we're going to have a nicely balanced moment of entertainment here. Because everybody knows that it's two sides against the other, each side against the other. And who are we to judge who is right and who's wrong? All we know is that they really need adults in the room in order to separate them, but they're really both as bad as each other. Now, I'm adding those words. Those words were never said, but that's exactly the message that's come through in interview after interview. So that from the perspective of people like you living in Scotland or elsewhere in the UK or even in the United States, you're at the mercy of people who filter the news, often giving it a horrifying spin in order to advance a narrative. Now, I'm not getting into politics at all when I say this. There's no question. Anybody who analyzes what's sold as news will say, yes, clearly there's a narrative, and more the shape of that narrative is predictable in advance. And it's not a narrative that tells the story from our perspective. I'd like to hear somebody do an analysis just about my case. I'm only giving it as an example, not because it's more important, it's not more important, where the victims on our side were mostly children. That was the purpose. The woman who set up this atrocity, this massacre, went looking for Jewish children, and she found them. After searching for days, she found the most child-rich target in the entire city of Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, the frontier town that I was referring to. Now, having massacred them, she then rushed back to read the news, as Jenny mentioned a little earlier, read the news, very cold-faced about it, and then later appeared in court, and she wasn't cold-faced at all, she was triumphant. But now fast forward, we're on the 23rd of March 2023, and she is an incredible star of stage, screen, and television in Jordan. She's free. She had her own self-branded TV program for 5 years. She's been indicted by the Department of Justice of the United States since 2013. That's not a mistake. 10 years. The United States keeps saying, we're doing our best. We're trying to get her. They've got a treaty with Jordan. They've got all the power in the world with Jordan, and Jordan is totally dependent on them because it's a vassal state of the United States. It gets more foreign aid than any other country on earth. My point is, you'll never hear the story told that way. This is not a clash between two equal and opposite forces. This is a clash between thoroughly evil people who want nothing for themselves but death for us, and our side, which has its hospitals filled with Palestinian Arab children. I'm an expert in that field because I have a very sick child. She's been sick since she was a year old. She's now 27. Every time I go into Shari Tzedek, which is where I go all the time, I'm there once a month at least with my daughter. All I see is Palestinian Arab children and the people around them. No one is complaining about that. No one wants to change that. No one would dare to change that. But for heaven's sake, there's a story here which is never, ever told. And I'll just add one small element to this that is very specific to the BBC. At a certain stage, the most important journalism school in the entire Arab world, which is based in Jordan, it's called Jordan Media Institute, its students, the best elite cohort of Arab journalism aspirants in the world, declared as their role model, as their one and only role model. They've never done it before or since. The woman that I've just been describing, Ahlam Tamimi. I went looking to see who gives money to the Jordan Media Institute, and lo and behold, top of the list was the government of a country you know very well that's headed by King Charles. And I wasn't at the time, though, it was his mother. So I wrote to the Foreign Ministry of the United Kingdom, the Department of, well, I'm forgetting what it's called, and said, this is absurd. You people are funding the Jordan Media Institute, whose students have just declared that the massacre, the perpetrator of the massacre is their role model. What does that mean about the sad state of journalism? And I cannot tell you how ugly was the dismissiveness of the response that I got from the BBC. I could tell 100 stories like that.
Thank you,
Thanks very much, Arnold.
You're not surprised at the BBC. Sorry, who's that speaking?
No, I was just saying I'll email you, Sammy, just to get some of the details from Arnold, because we might be able to do that through the Israel-British alliance, because they have managed to, talking about Iran now, they've managed to get some stuff done through the British Parliament. And if we could highlight that, Arnold, what you've said there about their Jordanian side, we could possibly get some pressure brought to bear on the British House of Commons with regard to that. So I'll ask Sammy just for some of the details there.
Yes, please do, Donald. I think I've got a question from Mickey and Ron. If that's the case, just send me a wee thing a message in the chat to know that you actually want to ask a question. And while I'm waiting for that, what I'd like to do is ask Jenny what I think is quite an interesting question from Colin Grant, who's actually in our house tonight, because you started off saying that you were a Christian and now you feel more Jewish. So are you a confused religious person? What do you treat yourself as now?
No, I'm still a Christian. But
still a Christian.
I'm still a Christian, but I have a Jewish heritage, and you know, I've embraced that fully. So
We all have Christian heritage.
That's
I'm-
Jean talking. I think that's Jean saying something.
We all have Jewish heritage.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose
not everybody here, I don't think.
everybody going back far enough will have Jewish heritage.
Yes,
sure.
that's what I mean.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
I'm sure Michael can confirm that. That's for sure.
And if you think about it, all Christians have a Jewish heritage.
That's what we're
Absolutely,
saying.
that's
Yeah,
what I mean.
yeah, that's right. There would be no Christians
That's
And
right.
you're speaking
otherwise.
to someone who
Absolutely.
goes to church with his wife to support her, okay?
Okay.
And I get looks, and I get sometimes admonished by some of my friends here. How can I go to church? I say, easy. It's a house of worship. I go
Right.
to support my wife. I go to talk to God, and it doesn't matter where I talk to God. God's going to hear me. Okay.
That's true. Can I just check? Sorry to interrupt. Mickey, did you have a question?
Yeah, well,
Yes.
it's not a question, it's a statement, really.
Can you make it short? Just make it short because we're running out of time.
Right, okay. Even before I met Aliyah 7 years ago, I was acquainted with 2 Glasgow victims of Israeli Arab terrorism. One was the brother of Jeremy Isaacs, the TV producer, and the other was Yoni Jesner. The brother of Jeremy Isaacs was murdered in Zion Square in Jerusalem, I don't know, many decades ago, maybe 40 years ago. And Jeremy, Yoni Jesner was killed in a bus bomb explosion in a bus that was traveling between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So there is a Glasgow awareness, surely, of the fact that we do have a connection to the subject of tonight's presentation.
Thank you for that, Vicky. Thank you. I think most people certainly wouldn't have known about that, but I think Yoni Jesner one is quite well known because his mother started a foundation or something in his name that has been a charge that's been going for some time. And people might not know that some of his body parts were donated to a Palestinian
That's
girl.
right. That's right.
Somebody asked his mother after he passed away if it would be possible to donate some of his parts to a Palestinian girl, and she agreed to do so, organs, which is a most wonderful story. Ron, did you have a question? Ron Lander?
I have a question.
Okay, Steve, go ahead.
Okay, just a little background first of all. I first met Sammy when I was walking on Buchanan Street, and we had a conversation, and it was very interesting because what I saw was a kiosk which promoted both Israel and Palestinian peace. We had a little conversation, and he mentioned to me, and I found it fascinating, and he mentioned to me that there was a Palestinian kiosk, and just tried as they might to get some type of combination that there wasn't interest on that side. Now, I'm an American who lives here and lives in Glasgow, and I'm an ardent supporter of Israel. Okay. I'm also an ardent supporter of Judaism. And like most of us here, I have a history which goes and is very similar to many. But what I'm concerned about and what fascinated me in the first place in talking to Sammy and his wife and so on and so forth, and what I'm looking forward to further contact when I'm back in Scotland, is Israel has a terrible public relations problem, like it or not, okay? That's number one. Number two, I'd like to know how we can get beyond. How do we get beyond? How can we get beyond the pain and suffering? How can they get beyond the pain and suffering? because I like to think, I may be naive, but I like to think that somewhere in this world, there's hope for a solution. But there's no solution if we're constantly living in the pain. So my question is, how do we get beyond the pain? How do we honestly begin to understand the pain on both sides? Because that's the only way we're ever going to get to some middle ground, which I hope won't be when I don't think it's going to be while I'm still here, but I'd like to think that at some point in time, I don't know that God's going to come down in his big white horse and just go poof, and there's going to be peace. But I'd like to think there was a chance.
I don't think we're going to get God to do that, Steve. And thank you very much for telling the people the story about meeting you on Buchanan Street. And we would love to see you there again. People might not know, we've been on Buchanan Street now for 7.5 years. And we go there every Saturday to talk to people. Of course, we didn't go during the COVID crisis, but we've been in since after the 2014 Gaza war. At the beginning of 2015, we decided to have a peace advocacy stall in the middle of Glasgow city centre. And we meet people there, all sorts of people, and that's how we met Steve. And one of the things we do have an opportunity to do that you don't have in Israel is talk to Palestinians and Israelis, because we have people from all over the world coming into Glasgow, and many of them are actually astonished to find a stall in the middle of Glasgow, which is actually, we have a slogan that says pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian, pro-peace, because we believe the only way we'll have peace is if we support both sides to a position where they feel they've got a chance to live in peace with each other. And that's what we do, and that's what we'll continue to do. And we hope to see you again, Steve, when you come to Glasgow.
You will see me again, especially because I'm living in a country where, unfortunately, anti-Semitism is becoming more and more prevalent.
Yeah.
It's always been around, but it's just becoming out there more and more. And it bothers me no end, especially because as a stranger in Glasgow, I'm a stranger, it's 20 years that I'm back and forth. But as a stranger in Glasgow, and you know, there's an anti-Israeli feeling. It's not so much pro-Palestinian as it is anti-Israeli.
Yeah.
Do it the other way around too. But I see where it translates into anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic, anti-Semitic.
People these days, they hide their anti-Semitism behind what they call anti-Zionism. Let me tell you, last Saturday, just a few days ago, there was a march in Glasgow called the Stand Up to Racism March, which is supposed to oppose all types of racism. And some of us marched, we joined the march on behalf of Glasgow Friends of Israel and the other organization we have called Confederation of Friends of Israel in Scotland. Now, there are a lot of left-wing people who believe and say that Israel is a racist state. And because Israel is a racist state and we support Israel, we by definition are also racist. And even though we marched along this march opposing racism and anti-Semitism, we had a very difficult time from people who didn't want us to be on the march because they believed we were racist. And I believe that they said they're anti-Zionist, but actually many of them are anti-Semitic. And they hide their anti-Semitism, which is to some extent somewhat illegal, with anti-Zionism, which is more accepted in many countries around the world, including Scotland, which is very sad indeed. I don't know, Jean is our vice chair. I don't know if she wants to say a few words. Jean has been coming to the stall since we started in 2015, and she still comes. Amazing. Jean, would you like to say something?
I would like just to say to Arnold, thank you, Arnold. We have heard what you've said, and we do feel for you. because we live here. I'm not Jewish. I support the Glasgow Friends of Israel because I know what the anti-Semitism is like in this country, and I'm ashamed of it. So we hear you and we stand with you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. That's wonderful. Maybe that's a really good note to finish on. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, thank Jenny, who I've known for a long time. So maybe Michael Tobias was the first Jewish person you met, and maybe I was the second. I don't know, perhaps.
You can be the second, Sammy.
But
That's
we've
fine.
been in touch with each other ever since, and my wife Vicky came up with the idea of having this Zoom event with Jenny, and I think it's been a most wonderful evening and everybody's enjoyed it. I'd like to also thank Arnold and Steve for joining us tonight and speaking with us tonight, and Tal, who I know is also there, and everybody else who's joined us for this really touching event. And we will be having another one sometime in the future, and we'll let you know about it. But just for tonight, thank you, Jenny, so much, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you,
So,
Sammy. Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jenny.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sammy
Bye-bye.
will be in touch.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Jenny, pleased to meet you. In fact, pleased to meet all
Thank
of
you,
you.
Jenny.
And keep praying against anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Sammy,
Keep
I'm
fighting
about
it.
Amen.
Keep fighting as well,
Spiritual.
not just praying. You have to fight it, not just pray.
Sammy, I'm
Yeah.
about to send you a photograph,
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
which you may find useful at your stand. It proves that Israel is not a racist apartheid country.
I
And
think
I've got several of these photographs, which I think could be useful as evidence of the statement that Israel is not an apartheid country.
we know that, Vicky, and we say that, and we have examples of it, and we talk to people about it all the time. But the trouble is the media is very one-sided, and we just have to keep going as best as we can. Okay?
Thank you for
Noreen's got her hand up.
Yes.
Who's that? Sorry?
Yeah, I'd just like to say a couple of things. There are two organizations in Israel, one called Women Wage Peace, in which
Yes.
there are Palestinian women,
Yes.
Orthodox women, Christian women, all faiths who speak to each other, including
Yes.
a very brave group of young Palestinian women who come into Israel. And there's another organization which I've only recently learned about called Roots, which was started
Yes.
by an Orthodox rabbi from Tekoa,
Yes.
together with an Arab, I've forgotten his name, who started up this Roots organization to try to get some dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians. So there is some sort of dialogue going on, in spite of everything else.
No. First of all, Noreen, thank you for that. There are many organizations in Israel made up of Israelis and Arabs.
Yeah, there are others, but there's
We
a
know
few
that.
big ones,
But-
yeah.
And we know about Women Wage Peace, and there are many more. But just to let you know that the rabbi you talked about from Roots actually came to Scotland
Okay.
with the Palestinians, and they were supposed to talk in the Scottish Parliament, and at the last minute it was cancelled
Aha.
because one of the parties who was supposed to be part of the event objected,
Uh-huh.
and the event had to be cancelled. And
Okay,
that's the
they had
kind
a
of thing.
Zoom program last week, which was very interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Okay, thank you.
All
And
right.
I think you do wonderful work on Buchanan Street.